When you open up the game, the Painscreek Killings, you're given very little instruction. You're a young and upcoming journalist, one who has been asked by your editor to investigate an abandoned town and the murders that happened there, but that's it. Beyond a brief letter the game opens with, the only hints you've got to start off with are in the police station right outside the town's entrance. There's a little bit more there, some newspaper scraps, a toilet, and a code to a lock. Okay, great. A code in my murder mystery game. That's a sense of progression. That opens doors, and this one specifically opens the cemetery. After writing it down, a glance at the map reveals it's all the way across town. It is a trek, but it's the first real goal you've got to work towards. You can beeline your way there, cutting through alleys and struggling to read street signs, but if you're anything like me, you're trying every door on the way there. Locked. 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 Locked car. Unlocked and abandoned inn with locked rooms. The game very quickly establishes that getting the code to the cemetery door was an exception, not the standard, and every mind-numbingly locked door only heightens the anticipation for that grand cemetery door swinging open. At least then, finally something would open up. After trudging through the streets and coming to the grand cemetery doors, you fumble through your notes to double-check the code, click on the door, and the door. The singular door in this entire town that you have the means to unlock despite banging on every door in this place has already been unlocked. Not left open, already unlocked. Immediately you start asking questions. How? Why? Did the deputy leave it unlocked? No, otherwise he wouldn't have left me the code. Was it just an old and rusty lock? No, it looked like it was in pretty good condition. Someone else unlocked it? Hey, what genre of game am I playing here again? This video essay will spoil the following games, some with minor spoilers and some with major spoilers. Feel free to pause to read through this list, and please don't complain, this is your warning. Let's establish something really quick. When I say game designers should lie, I am not talking about underhanded kinds of lies. This isn't a video about deceiving an audience to get a quick buck, hiding gotcha rates, or anything like that. It also isn't about the good fun of lying in a purely narrative sense, like revealing that the party member you were fighting alongside was actually the Demon King all along. Wow. No. This is a video about when the game tells you in a meta context that you're going to unlock a door with a key and then leaves that door already unlocked. It is about the game itself, telling you its rules and then finding a loophole. But what are video game rules? Broadly put, they can be understood as 1. The way the virtual world operates, and 2. The way to win the game. In the case of the Painscreek Killings, the rules it implies at the start of the game are that of a standard mystery. Nowadays, however, very few games come with an instruction manual. Things aren't laid out neatly for you on pages because gamers didn't come here to read. They want to understand what buttons to press and feel, and how to think through combat without needing to pause the game and memorize some rule set first. As such, beyond said button presses, games are encouraged to make learning the rules of the game intuitive and fun. Essays have been written about the genius of level 1-1 of Super Mario Bros. But it's been years since Super Mario Bros. Came out, and for many people, that was their first game ever. It was made for gamers who weren't yet gamers, who had never picked up a controller in their life. Hundreds of thousands of games have been released since then, and we've gained a greater understanding of video game genres as a result. FPS games don't need to explain that when you aim your gun and pull the trigger, you shoot an enemy. Romance simulators don't need to explain that you can date most of the cast that was on the box art. Mystery games don't need to explain to you that you're hunting for, well. I first came across the idea for this video because, as a game developer myself, I was curious. Why do some games leave the player furious, demanding a refund and declaring false advertising, while other games are praised as masterful subversions in absolute cinema? I started off by reading Steam reviews, of course, but on paper, critiques seemed surface level. Comparisons were altogether similar. It didn't feel as if there were any real differences that could be found. Of course, this isn't paper, this is video games, the ultimate art form, so we can assume that there's something else cooking here. I decided to sit myself down and figure out why exactly these moments felt so emotionally charged. To return to the Painscreek Killings, ultimately it is a mystery game. It is a game about solving an overarching mystery, but also little mysteries. In games like Ace Attorney, you need to find clues to answer questions that will progress the plot. In the Painscreek Killings, you find keys to unlock the many doors to find clues to answer questions that will progress the plot. So why rob you of the very first key you found? I've actually lied to you a little myself. The Painscreek Killings actually marketed itself as an exception from the get-go. It touted itself as an open-world mystery game where you, the player, can solve the mystery in any order you want, following any clues you wish. The Graveyard Door seems to further push the idea of a unique mystery game. And perhaps that's all it is, a differentiator. It is a slow-paced game when you take it at your own pace. No weapons, no health bar. The opening of the game got my little baby heart pounding, but it served only to show the ways the game was already subverting genre expectations. This was a game by first-time developers, after all. How much could they even handle making? Changing up expectations isn't just a challenge for a player, after all. It's a huge challenge for the developer. I've certainly had many sleepless game jams where ideas I felt were fun and subversive ultimately turned out to be painfully unfun. Crazy premises are oftentimes a lot more fun in theory than in practice. 100 Line Last Defense Academy is a game with a crazy premise. The specificities of the plot, as cool and anime-like as they are, being about a bunch of students handpicked to defend their school from alien invaders, are less important than the marketing here. And yes, okay, I know I said deceptive marketing wasn't the topic of the video essay here, but we're starting off with an exception to my own rule. But the thing about 100 Lines marketing is that it isn't deceptive, it's just selective about what it says in order to mislead player expectations. After all, one of the only things we knew about this game before its release was that it was a game that would have 100 endings. 100 endings. 100 endings? This was the big, mind-blowing number that Kodaka and Uchikoshi, makers of games like Danganronpa and Zero Escape, had thrown out into the world for us. It had everyone gaping in disbelief. Really? 100 endings? There had to be shortcuts here and there. It seemed the logical outcome. It wasn't practical to make that many endings and uphold any level of quality. In all honesty, it was pretty intimidating. I'm no stranger to long games, but 100 endings. 100 endings? But it was a trick, see? Not the fact that there were that many endings, that much was true, but it served to hide a question. How would these endings be decided? There were choices the player would have to make, yes, but how? There are many kinds of choices one can make throughout a game. Traditional choice selection is one, but outcomes could be decided by whether or not you won a battle, who you spent the most time with, whether or not you spared an enemy. This much was not only unclear, but deliberately hidden from the public. When the demo came out before the full game released, it seemed like we had an answer. A big old classic, save the girl or let her die decision popped up at the very start of the game, enough for everyone to let out a sigh of relief. How nice and familiar. What a cool little animation, very Uchikoshi core of you. Glad to see that this game is just a really, really, really big visual novel. Thank you very much, Kodaka. Or is it? 100 Line Last Defense Academy takes place over, you guessed it, 100 days. It's indicated by a little number in the top right corner, counting up and up and up. After I saved my beloved childhood friend or whatever, the first few of my days at the academy passed by with little fanfare as I waited excitedly for my next decision to pop up. Would it be when I first fought the invaders? Perhaps whether or not to go rescue Eito? To fight at second to last Defense Academy? The days ticked up from 20 to 30 to 40 to 50? Okay, I reasoned. It is 100 endings. I guess they just want to have them all in the second half in order to cut down on writing. 60 days passed, 70, 80, 90. The final boss battle was approaching and I started to wonder, had I already been making decisions up until this point? There were decisions I had made up until that point after all. I had hung out with certain characters, had decided which boss enemy to feed to my soldiers after every battle. Perhaps the writers had simply wanted to subvert my expectations with that first decision? led me to believe decisions would be one way, so I simply tripped my way into whatever route I got myself on? I don't know. 30 hours into the game, the 100th day came. Several characters had died, the ultimate goal of our defensive line failed to be realized, and spirits were generally terrible across the board. Oh well, I figured, I guess I'll try to do better next time, get a different ending, it's all over for the characters in this loop, but I, their overseeing god, can give them another... wait a second. The protagonist can turn back time? Wait, my decision-making starts now? 100 Line Last Defense Academy never lied to you. It never broke its rules. It laid them out clearly before the game was even released, from its marketing tagline to its demo. Yet it twisted and pushed its rules to the point where I questioned whether or not those rules were there anymore. Dozens of hours into the game and I wasn't sure what I was playing, and that only made me want to play more. While as players we know that 100 Line has to have 100 endings unless they want to risk a lawsuit, and thus the results that the players come up upon are non-permanent, the characters of 100 Line don't know that. There is no grand diverging of path, there is only forward. Think now of your real life. We hear advice like, no point in wishing things had been different, all the time because we can't change things. So then, the reveal of being able to turn back time is as much of a relief to the player as it is to the protagonist. It gives whole new meaning to the choices in the story. I won't spoil the first real decision you make in the game, if only because holy it's a decision that holds real weight because you know the potential consequence behind it. You've seen the bad end. You're not stumbling through blindly. When you make a decision, you are making it knowing you are entering a diverged path. And so does the protagonist. In this way, 100 Line Last Defense Academy puts you in the same shoes as the protagonist. 100 endings is not just a marketing promise, but a promise for the future. Rather than intimidated by the idea of 100 endings, like I had been at the start of the game, they were a hope for a happier ending. Of course, it is one thing to seem to break your own rules, to hold off on it for so long that your players think you've lied to them. But what about a game that has set up truly impossible rules for the player? A game that, by how it has been laid out to you, cannot be beaten. How does a game prevent ire from the player in that regard? While stat raising as a mechanic is present in basically any game that has a leveling system of any sort, stat raising games are primarily associated as a subgenre of otome games, or romance-based visual novels. It is definitely more popular in Japan than the West, although some games like Long Live the Queen, the Yogg, and the Monster Prom series have gained a good degree of popularity among English-speaking audiences. Recently, also Musume, but you know. All that being said, it is games like Tokimeki Memorial, a popular Japanese dating sim series, that really pushed forward stat raising as a mechanic. It is no wonder, then, that Märchen Line sells itself hand-in-hand with stat raising as a dating simulator. Märchen Line, for its part, never acts like it's just a dating sim. You are a soldier serving in the first among Father's Voyager Armada, venturing out to liberate the Milky Way from the true enemy. It's a sci-fi visual novel. But it does still have romanceable characters, and it does still have stats that you need to raise to appeal to them. To complement the fact that you're an utter failure of a soldier, you're presented with stat check after stat check that you automatically fail. Not even particularly high stat checks, but still too high for you. When you awaken to your true potential, there's a sense of, yep, the game has started now, great, I can finally lift weights good enough for the cute tall girl to spare a second glance at me. I can think fast enough to outsmart the critters in our training session. I am seeing these goals and I am hitting them. But partway through the game, there is a subtle change. There's an odd stat check that gets introduced about halfway through, a level 10 strength check. Okay, I thought that stats only went up to level 9, but I guess I miscounted. Some more time passes, and there is a level 30 will check. That's really high. I thought I had already awakened to my true potential. But then again, this is a game with multiple love interests, which means replay value. Maybe the stats will stack upon each other in New Game Plus, or perhaps I'll get an item that'll allow for faster stat growth. It is a little frustrating, but no more than the initial checks failed at the very start of the game. In a way, they're almost exciting. A new goalpost to hit. It's a way to keep the game fresh and reward the player for the time they've spent with it. I've played Tokimeki before. I know that one method of building my character isn't the end-all be-all. Let's explore my options, build a different kind of perfect warrior. After I beat the big bad, of course. I mentioned that Märchen Line has a subtle change beforehand, but the tone shift of the last arc of the game is anything but subtle. Peppered throughout the story are hints of a darker nature of the world you inhabit, impossible cruelties that lay across space. But this enemy, dubbed the Cancer, is neatly squared away as something beatable in training simulations. But in this last arc, the stat checks went from a gimmick to clearly impossible. There is no way to beat these stat checks, no way to replay the game and have them build upon each other. It became increasingly clear that there was no point to even attempting to surmount these checks. Rather than the stimulating goalposts I was hitting earlier on, I am left in a state of, well, despair is too dramatic a term, but I'm not feeling great about my prospects. The Cancer, which had been so easily beatable as a video game character beforehand, is now sequestered away into something different, something beyond your reach. And pretty quickly, I realized why. At the climax of the game, you're sent on a suicide mission for reasons that are a little too complicated to explain quickly. Go play the game yourself, it's really good. But the environment is now a surrealistic horror den where the majority of your comrades have died, your life is hell, and yes, this is where those impossible stat checks have been introduced. It hardly felt like it was the same game. And that's because it wasn't. Or at least, unbeknownst to me, the rules of the game had changed. Breaking into the final level of this environment reveals that the big bad of Märchen Line is a machine god. He is a being that has been speaking to you through your text box and has observed your every move. He is the one who has been deciding your stat checks, determining just how much to push you forwards, or how to keep it just out of your reach. And he is the one behind the Cancer. He has been spawning these creatures for millennia. His reasons for doing so are that without a common enemy, humans would fall into war with each other. This terrifying, grueling enemy that he has conjured up is a way to keep humans occupied. They are too busy fighting an inhuman evil to come up with human evils. They are entertained by his goalposts. Broken down to its simplest terms, this is your relationship with God in Märchen Line. He gives you goals to run toward, you reach them, you beat them, you live on. He is constantly giving you aforementioned goalposts to hit so you are just stimulated enough to keep playing. When you try to break his rules, to break into his base and to kill him, well, you can't do that. The stat checks are far too high for you. See? He set them up that way. There is no real way to beat him. He is your best ally and your worst enemy. He is making you play the perfect game. Or, well, I guess there's the solution, right? Because if you're playing a game and you're being asked to do the impossible within it, how can you even hope to get one hand over it? It's obvious, if you haven't guessed. Just stop playing the game. That being said, there is an ending to Märchen Line. 3 of them, in fact, more if you count different iterations of the true end based on which characters you romance. This isn't a dig at the developers, to be clear. The endings are appropriate to the setting and writing, and you should go and play them yourself. But rather than actually stopping to play the game, you break the rules. You play a new game. And while it is done in a novel way in Märchen Line, it is not in itself a novel concept. In fact, it is heavily employed in one of the most well-known games of all time.
This is the story of a man named Stanley.
It feels like there isn't much about the Stanley Parable that hasn't been covered in essays, reviews, videos, or even television shows. So if I repeat points you've heard before, you'll have to forgive me. To those somehow unaware, the Stanley Parable is a game about a man named Stanley working at an office, when he suddenly realizes that all of his coworkers are missing. A narrator dictates Stanley's actions and presumably his inner thoughts, only for the player to quickly realize something upon coming across 2 doors. The player can go through the right door rather than the left easily. In fact, it provides a whole new world of whimsy and wonder for the player. The option to disobey. Yeah, that narrator guy. No more railroading me into decisions. Finally, a game where I can really stick it to him. A game where I get to disobey what it wants me to do. Why? Because it's way funnier that way. Way funner that way. Why would I ever do what the game wants? Why would this be a game where I obey? Again, what has been said about the Stanley Parable that hasn't been said before? In its unpredictability, it has become, ironically, predictable. And there is no one more aware of this fact than the game itself. Through a series of unfortunate events, I never actually played the Stanley Parable until the Ultra Deluxe Edition was released in 2022. On account of pursuing game development as a career, I was of course familiar with it through general pop culture, which means that I had the following expectation. The Stanley Parable is a game where you disobey the narrator. Which I suppose isn't an inaccurate assessment, but doesn't that ruin the whole point? A more accurate description of the Stanley Parable should be a game about decision-making. Yet that's hardly what it's remembered for. It's the decision to disobey that's fun, not the one to obey. Thus we arrive at my original assessment, a game where you disobey the narrator. Here is what I quickly realized was different about the two games. The Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe does not care what decision you make, but it does care that you make it, and that it leads you to play the game further. When you first start the new content for the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe, the narrator tours you through negative reviews and laments them, pausing at one wishing that there was a skip button. He is all too happy to oblige, only to realize, horrifically, that skipping a button means you skip him. You skip his stupid rambles, which means you skip the ability to disobey him, which means, are you even playing the game? Make every decision you want, of course. Keep playing the game, dodging the narrator's demands, and taking him off all the more. Disobey him or obey him or find some silly loophole, but play it. Don't skip it. Don't stop. Because after you twist every single expectation, after you subvert every possible idea of a rebellious decision in a video game that you can possibly come up with, there is only one type of question remaining. A question that the Stanley Parable is terrified of asking. So terrified, in fact, that it is hidden under a menu, only accessible when you try to stop playing. Can you pause for a second? Will you keep playing the game? In all honesty, stopping to play a game is far less dramatic a decision than I make it sound. Everyone stops playing every game at some point or other. You go to sleep every night, pause matches to eat dinner, grow bored. I mean, I'm sure that the majority of people here have a graveyard of half-finished Steam games, right? I know I do. It isn't the decision itself, then, that is so strange, but it is the fact that it is presented that is. The very end of the game has you presented with a computer that gives you the option any diehard fan would love, the ability to create a sequel for the Stanley Parable. Actually, not just one sequel, 2, 7, 100, an infinite amount of Stanley Parables. The decision to play on and on and on, even when the game itself is just a repetitive slop. Because at least it is more of the game. You need to keep playing the game. Please keep generating endless Stanley Parables to keep playing the game. This is what makes the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe unique in this video about unique games. It is not subverting the expectations of genre or games in general, as other games I've discussed thus far have, but the expectations of its own making. Sure, you can rebel against the narrator again. Choose the right door, if you want. But this time, it isn't a new world of whimsy and wonder for you to explore. You're not sticking it to the narrator or, well, anyone at all. Because when you end your time with the game, well, you're ending it. Although you can finish up the story of the Painscreek Killings at any time, there is actually really only one true way for the player to complete the game. According to How Long to Beat, it should be about 8 or so hours since the average player last encountered that unlocked graveyard door. And though there have been a few unexpected light flickers and ominous shapes in the distance, there's been nothing truly concrete. Indeed, by the ending of the game, the player is likely lulled into a sense of security, tension rising only from their desire to finish up the mystery. No matter what road the player takes to reach it, they will ultimately find themselves in a small room that is, pretty obviously by that point, the killer's room. They'll open up a drawer, find a small recording by the desk, and... Hey, what's that? I've seen HP bars fill suddenly onto the screen beforehand, my heart usually filled with determination as I faced off bosses in Elden Ring and the like. But they would be other people's HP bosses. And also, this isn't Elden Ring. This is my slightly unnerving walking simulator. What do you mean I've got an HP bar right now? I never had one this entire game. What do you mean I can't save anymore? I didn't expect to be fearing for my life. This isn't supposed to be a game with combat or chase sequences or any gameplay beyond snooping around houses long abandoned. Everything had been outlined neatly beforehand, and I had been aware of what I needed to do to win this game. Or at least I had felt like I did. The sudden vivid awareness of my life isn't just a surprise to me after all, but the detective I've been playing as. Even if it wasn't obvious to me when I first booted up the game, even if the warning signs were subtle or non-existent, something changed the moment that HP bar appeared. Suddenly I wasn't playing a role, I was the role. And I realized the detective and I were both in over our heads. What was supposed to happen hadn't happened. But after all, what is supposed to happen? Provided you are not spoiled for a game, the only real roadmap you have is your own assumptions. And assumptions, like safe genres or invisible boundaries, are meant to be broken. Because we are just like the detective, like the protagonists of 100 Line and Märchen Line, like the very next game of the Stanley Parable. Neither they nor we know what is going to happen next. Breaking these genre conventions puts you in the same field as the characters you play as. These assertions of expectations bring you closer than ever to feel what a character is feeling. In video games and stories, we are so used to narrative tropes and cliches that, while as useful as they can be, we fall into a sense of comfort. We don't need to know the upcoming story beat by beat to know that there is an expectation. When the other shoe drops, we are ready for it. But in the real world, there are no tropes. There are no genre conventions, no label on the box that says, "This game is a horror game, so watch out for the end of these idyllic days." A scary abandoned town is scary. You know what you need to study in college to get a cushy job, and when you make daily life-altering decisions like what clothes you wear to an interview, there's no implication that you'll get a time loop after it. Yet, scary abandoned towns could have a murderer crawling around in it, or at least a feral raccoon. Job post listings lie about what they want from you all the time. And I've yet to knowingly meet someone who can time loop, but if I did, I know how I'd feel. Every game developer hears obnoxious buzzwords equating a game's goodness to its immersiveness, or how much the players were able to empathize with their characters, or whatever. These things are oftentimes important to a game, of course, but many times the solution to this manifests in a 100,000-word tragic backstory, in hyper-realistic graphics, in chilling jump scares, in heart-rending orchestral pieces. Of course, you don't need to do any of that. To make players feel like they're a part of your game's world, to heighten their emotional experience, all you need to do is put them on the same playing field as the characters. All you need to do is lie to the two of them equally.
Ouais.